Hi friends, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Here's what we're discussing today. So today we're going to talk about the Trump versus the United States, the immunity ruling by the Supreme Court. There have been a lot of people talking about this ruling since it came out. About, 10% of the people talking about it actually understand the ruling. They actually understand the history, and they actually understand why immunity of some variety must be available to the president for his official actions. There are two competing policies, or issues, if you will, in the Trump immunity case. On the one hand, you have a group of people who believe that in contesting the viability of the 2020 election, either by pressuring the vice president or by talking to his supporters, that President Trump, then President Trump, violated the criminal law. On the other side of the coin, you have people who believe that what is happening here is the current sitting president is attempting to imprison his chief rival for that office. And I believe that there is a fairly large number of people now who believe that, and that seems to be indicated in the polls. Whether you're in Camp A or Camp B doesn't really matter. The question was presented to the Supreme Court as to whether the president, when he was president, and took actions when he was president, is immune from prosecution for at least some of those actions. And of course, the court decided that he was, as you have no doubt heard by this point. I am going to try to explain this as simply as I can, and I'm going to use some graphic aids here to help us understand exactly what's going on and what the court is saying and what the court means. I am going to put up here a link to the TLDR on this so you can cut to the chase if you're not interested in the entirety of the opinion. And no, I'm not going to read the entire opinion to you. I'm not even going to read the syllabus because I don't think the syllabus does a very good job of laying out what the issue really is and where the immunities actually lie. And I think that seems to be the major problem with this opinion, is that people can't figure out what is immune conduct and what is not immune conduct. Hopefully, I can give you some clarity on that by the end of this video. So this is the structural design of our government. We have three co-equal branches of government. Congress enacts the laws, the executive executes the laws, and the judiciary interprets and applies the law, and the judiciary also acts as a problem resolution service when Congress and the president can't get along. The design of the nation's system, I think, was very well thought out at the time of the founding. Of course, obviously, none of those people thought that there might someday be an internet. None of them thought that there someday might be a way to game the system. Nobody ever really thought, I don't think, that someone would go after a political party or a political person using the criminal law as a way to accomplish policy. Now, as a way to right a wrong, I think they may have expected that, but the constitutional design of our government does lend some credence to the idea that the executive needs to be, in some respects, immune from acts that he's taken. And that's based on, again, just the general design, that you have somebody who's going to execute the laws, and they need to be immune in that context, just in the same way that Congress, a congressperson, is immune if they pass a law that somebody doesn't like. Nobody can sue them for that, and no one can take them to jail for that. Because when they vote on a statute, it is their vote, they are representing the people, and essentially they are voting on behalf of however many constituents they have. So naturally, you can't throw all those constituents in jail, and you can't throw a congressperson in jail. Similarly, if a judge makes a bad decision, as happens routinely in the federal district courts and in the federal courts of appeal, they are not subject to arrest and prosecution for that. They are subject, in fact, to being removed through impeachment, although I don't think that's necessarily the exclusive way to remove a judge, based on, again, on the text of the Constitution. But those are the ways in which judicial officers can be held to account through the governing process, because all of this design was designed so that the executive could check Congress, and the executive could check the courts, and the courts could check the executive and Congress. And in essence, there's overlapping streams of control in our government to prevent one branch from being more powerful in all respects than the others. And that, I think, is a legitimate concern. So I do understand why people would be upset about somebody getting complete immunity as the president. So while I do not want to read the entire syllabus or opinion to you, I do want to read a few selected passages from the opinion to give you an idea of what the holding actually is, so that you see what the holding actually is not, which is probably what you've been told by a lot of the media people who cover this. One of the reasons that the media does such a horrible job when they are covering opinions from the Supreme Court is that none of them are lawyers and they don't understand what's actually going on. So let's look real quickly at the holding of this opinion. The opinion starts off with an allegation regarding, or with the allegations in the complaint or in the indictment, and then it moves on to say here that both the district court and the D.C. Circuit declined to decide whether the indicted conduct involved official acts. And the reason that they did that was because Trump had raised an official immunity claim, and rather than decide what kind of acts these were at issue, they just decided that there was no such thing as presidential immunity, so they didn't have to bother looking at the actual acts themselves. So then we get to the holding. Under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority. And he is entitled to at least presumptive immunity from prosecution for all of his official acts. But there is no immunity whatsoever for unofficial acts. And then they note that this first case of the president ever being tried for criminal conduct, they say the nature of the power of the president requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office. And they say that the exercise of his core constitutional powers, the immunity is absolute, and as for his remaining official actions, he's entitled to at least presumptive immunity. So let's break that down. What does that mean? It means that he is presumed to be immune if he is exercising an official power. However, that presumption can be rebutted, and we'll get to that here in a moment. They go on to talk about not all of his official acts fall within his conclusive and preclusive authority. The framers designed the presidency to provide for a vigorous and energetic executive, appreciating the unique risks that arise when a president's energies are diverted by proceedings that might render him unduly cautious in the discharge of his duties. The court has recognized presidential immunities and privileges rooted in the constitutional tradition of the separation of powers and supported by our history. So that's the key to the entire opinion. Basically, because of history, the separation of powers, and the structure of government, the president has official immunity for anything that is in his conclusive domain. Let's take a look in very simple fashion at what the president has in terms of immunity and where all of these functions actually lie. You see here two large black circles, one for official acts and one for unofficial acts. And this is one of the primary dividing lines with respect to the immunity that a president has. Inside the left circle for official acts, there is a big red circle that says conclusive immunity, and then underneath that, acts pursuant to statute or constitution. This is where the Constitution or a statute gives the president a power, and he acts pursuant to the power that is granted to him, appointing ambassadors, for example, or executing the law of the Clean Water Act and issuing regulations or proposing fines, that sort of thing. It is within that red circle that the Constitution, according to the Supreme Court, grants the president absolute immunity. He cannot be charged, he cannot be prosecuted. However, that is not a big circle. It is a relatively small circle when you consider all of the other things that a president does in the course of an average day. The blue shaded area is the area of presumptive immunity, meaning there is a presumption of immunity for an official act taken by the president under this part of the doctrine, but it is not conclusive. Rather, there is a presumption that immunity exists, and presumptions can be rebutted. And the way they are rebutted, as put forth in the text of the opinion, is as follows. At a minimum, the president must be immune from prosecution for an official act unless the government can show that applying a criminal prohibition to that act would pose no danger of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. The court then goes on to say that if for a president's unofficial acts there is no immunity, although presidential immunity is required for official actions to ensure that a president's decision-making is not distorted by the threat of future litigation stemming from those actions, that concern does not support immunity for unofficial conduct. The separation of powers does not bar a prosecution predicated on the president's unofficial acts. The first step, then, in deciding whether a former president is entitled to immunity from a particular prosecution is to distinguish his official from unofficial actions. In this case, no court thus far has drawn that distinction in general or with respect to the conduct alleged in particular. It is therefore incumbent upon the court to be mindful that it is a court of final review and not first view. Critical threshold issues in this case are how to differentiate between a president's official and unofficial actions and how to do so with respect to the indictment's extensive and detailed allegations covering a broad range of conduct. The court offers guidance on those issues. And the first guidance they offer says that when a president acts pursuant to constitutional and statutory authority, he takes official action to perform the functions of his office. And that is the red circle inside the official acts circle on the diagram here. After discussing some of the other acts alleged in the indictment, they move on to this. Whenever the president and vice president discuss their official responsibilities, they engage in official conduct. Presiding over the January 6th certification proceeding, at which members of Congress count the electoral votes, is a constitutional and statutory duty of the vice president. The indictment's allegations that Trump attempted to pressure the vice president to take particular acts in connection with his role at the certification proceeding thus involve official conduct, and Trump is at least presumptively immune from prosecution for such conduct. The question then becomes whether that presumption of immunity is rebutted under the circumstances. It is the government's burden to rebut the presumption of immunity. And let's remember here, of course, that the vice president is a part of the executive branch too. So the task for the district court is to determine whether the actions of President Trump in that regard fall within the shaded blue circle of presumptive immunity or outside that circle as both an official act, but one for which the presumption does not apply because it has been rebutted under the circumstances. So there is no absolute immunity here, at least with respect to the issues involving Vice President Pence and the certification of the election. Well, that's what I have for you today. I should probably note that I don't necessarily agree completely with this opinion. It's a difficult opinion to break down. It's going to be discussed and reviewed by scholars for many a year, and I think history is only going to be the right place to judge whether this was a correct decision or an incorrect decision. We will simply have to see. And as promised, here is the TLDR on immunity. For duties assigned by the Constitution or statute, the president has absolute immunity. For example, Article 2, Section 2 gives him the power to fill recess appointments, and he can do that. And 8 U.S.C. Section 1182 gives him the right to waive certain health conditions for immigrants. Again, using those two examples, he has absolute immunity for acts taken in furtherance of those two issues. For duties not specifically assigned but which are official, there is presumptive immunity. For example, greeting foreign diplomats, representing the U.S. at the G7 conference, those sorts of things. The presumption of immunity is rebuttable. The government can rebut it by showing that applying a criminal prohibition to the act challenged that is asserted to be criminal would pose no danger of intrusion into the authority and function of the executive branch. That is the TLDR. It is immunity in a nutshell. And I believe if you read the opinion, you will find that that is the sum and substance of what the Supreme Court decided in this case. So hopefully I've broken it down fairly. As I mentioned, I do have sort of a bit of empathy for President Trump, but I also understand that there is a need to hold people accountable when they cross the line. The question is just really whether he crossed that line. We'll have to see in the days and months to come how the courts come down on the issue of presumptive immunity as it pertains to Vice President Pence. Thank you again for watching. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below, or you can email me at the address above. Like, share, subscribe, all those kinds of things. I appreciate you being here. And, of course, if you have the opportunity today, do something kind for someone. And then come on back down here and join me at the beach next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.